Hey, thanks for tuning in once again. My last video I asked you guys for questions that you might have for me that I could answer, and I started putting together this elaborately produced video to answer those questions. My brother did a lot to help me with that, and then I realized just editing and all that was going to take too long to do it that way. We'll probably still finish that, put it together for a later date, but I want to get more content on my YouTube channel and not keep you guys waiting for answers to your questions. So put the bigger production on hold for now, and I figured I would just dive in, straight up answer some questions, show a little bit more of my process as you see in this video. I'm not sure how much I will directly discuss what's going on in this video, so that might raise some questions for future videos, but for now I figured I'll just answer your questions. You can watch this in the background. So I guess I should also preface this discussion, these answers, with the disclaimer that just because I do things a certain way doesn't mean that's the way to do it. And I still watch any tutorial or video I can find that shows how an artist works. I remember when I first started doing that, I thought, oh, that's how it's done. And so then I'd see another artist and it would be a slightly different way, and I thought, oh, is that guy doing it right? That guy doing it wrong? Maybe I should do it this way. And I would constantly change my process entirely, thinking the last video that I saw must be the right way to do it. And really, it took me long enough to realize there is no right way. Whatever way works for you is the right way. If you're doing this for a job, it's really whatever gets it done at the end of the day. It doesn't really matter how you get there. From a personal satisfaction side, that process can make it enjoyable or not. So for the end result, the process doesn't really matter. For yourself, it probably does. And anyway, so when I answer these questions or you see this video, this is certainly not the only way to do these things. That's how I do them, and I'm constantly changing. I bet if I could probably remake this video in about a year, and it would be very different. So keep that in mind as I answer these questions, and we'll answer the way I know how. So one question I've asked a lot, and I have gotten a few times, is how do I develop a style? And that's coming from another artist asking how to develop a style, and others asking me how I've developed my style. To answer that latter question, I would say I haven't really developed a style for myself. Now I say that because I'm probably too close to my artwork, to the stuff that I make, because I've had other people tell me, oh, that's definitely your style, which I don't necessarily see, but I think that's kind of the key to a style. When you don't make a conscious effort to create a style. And I know that's kind of tough, because I remember in art school, especially in the illustration program, they really focus on telling the artists to come up with a style. And you do need to differentiate yourself from other artists. What is it about your work that will make someone want to hire you? And it depends on the kind of work you're doing. If you're doing concept art, personal style doesn't matter as much. You're being hired to put together an image that will sell a scene in a movie, or will sell a certain design, and there's no room there for much of your own expression. Not to say you can't put yourself into it, but nobody's going to look at it and say, oh, I wish it were drawn with colored pencil instead of paint, because ultimately they're going to choose a design, not a designer, when it comes to signing off on concepts. Now on the other side of that, you've got editorial illustration, things like that. Certainly an editor is going to look for a specific style to match the article or whatever piece of the illustration is accompanying, and a lot of that can come down to the artist. So that's why a lot of art schools will tell you you must develop your own style. I'm certainly not going to refute that altogether, but I think it can kind of be putting the cart before the horse. When I think of style, I like to think in metaphors. One that I always think of is someone's walking gait. G-A-I-T, gait, how they walk. Have you ever noticed you've got a friend or a family member, somebody you know well, you see him or her down the street walking towards you, before you see his facial features, what he's wearing, things like that, you can often identify that person as being your brother, your friend, your sister, whoever it is. And then as they come closer, that is kind of confirmed by the other things. But there's just a certain way each of us walks. And I think of that as a kind of a metaphor for artistic style. That person is not thinking, I do this with my left foot, this with my right, this is how I shift my weight. Probably not. Probably his or her natural gait is just what comes naturally, but can be enough to identify that person. Now, if that person's putting on a gait, like strutting down the street or something like that, that might disguise that person, or it might be, put on. And I think style can kind of be that way too. If you're trying to emulate Norman Rockwell or Frank Frazetta or something like that, that's kind of like putting on a strut or trying to copy someone else's walk, there's nothing wrong with that. That can be fun to, try other things and help develop your style. And that's maybe where the walking metaphor falls apart. You're probably not going to try to walk like someone unless, well, maybe you could. I don't know. You find a good walk, you can submit it to the Ministry of Silly Walks or something. But generally, we walk a certain way, and that's just how we walk. So that's how I think of style. It's just kind of something that eventually comes out, you develop, and it's whatever comes naturally to you. Again, just my 2 cents on that. I've had people ask if I use reference. So I'm doing this 300 Days of Star Wars. These sketches in this video are from that series, and I'm doing some digital painting over them. But people ask if I've used reference for these or if I just know the characters and items well enough to not have to. And in this particular case, I do both. I can't say for either of these characters that I've studied them well enough to really be able to draw them off the bat. I had to look up reference, and you might even see some reference shots pop up as I'm trying to figure out the colors for them and everything. So I'll often use it if I don't know it off the top of my head, or I want to double check it. I don't know how many times I've drawn Boba Fett, and I still feel like I need to check the shape of his knee pads are kind of funny, and certain elements that I kind of forget. So I'll use reference. Vader, I've drawn quite a few times. I don't use reference as much for him. But again, these are things that I draw a lot, and I kind of get those ingrained in my mind. I will always, if it's something I'm not familiar with or I need help figuring certain elements out, I'll always use reference. And honestly, I don't know what people did before the internet. Looking online is the best way to find reference for, especially if you're doing things based on a well-known IP. There are tons of images out there. Even if it's not IP related, you want to look up a car or what do mountains look like, what do cliffs look like, things like that. And I've got folders and folders on my hard drives of reference images, and half of my bookmarks on my internet browser are sites that have pictures and reference and things like that. Because if you're going to try to communicate something visually, it should be based on something that people can recognize. And unless you've studied that thing a lot, you're going to need to see what that looks like. So most of the time I'll use reference, at least start with reference, and then enough practice I can kind of leave reference behind on some stuff. And that's not to say I'm copying exactly what I see, but part of using reference is studying it, finding out what is it that makes this type of rock different from this other type of rock, or how do I know this is grass instead of a tree, things like that. And that requires study. That's looking at it, drawing it different ways to try to capture, almost caricaturize whatever it is you're trying to draw, to kind of distill it down to its key elements so you can more quickly and more effectively communicate that thing in an image. And I could do a whole thing on reference. I'm just going to kind of skip through these questions, but if you have deeper questions and you can't find them online, you probably can. But if you have a hard time with that, I can answer some of those later. So another question I've had is how you combine digital and traditional workflows. And I'm kind of hoping to answer some of that with this video. So these sketches, and I'm doing 2 characters throughout the duration of this video, so that's why it's plural, why I'm saying these characters. They started out as physical sketches, so pencil and then ink on a piece of paper. I then traced it in, brought it into Photoshop, and I'm painting it digitally. That workflow can be determined by different factors. If I were doing this for a project at work, I probably just would have done the whole thing digitally unless I'm going for a certain look. It's just faster that way. You can do it digitally, save it to the server. Whoever needs to get it can retrieve it and look at it later. It's a lot faster, usually. But to me, I mean, this whole 300 Days of Star Wars thing is to force myself to work a little more traditionally. It's something I've moved away from because it is messier. It takes a little bit more time to set up and clean up. I've kind of moved away from that in my professional work. So I'm trying to force myself to do this on the side, and I'm really enjoying it. So I kind of go back and forth. With these, obviously, it started traditional. I scanned it in, and it's becoming a digital piece. Sometimes I will sketch things up in Photoshop where I have the flexibility of layers in Photoshop that I can move elements around and really fine-tune the composition. I'll do some more videos showing some of that later. I'm working on a couple pieces right now where this is kind of the process I'm going. I'll sketch it up, draw it up somewhat in Photoshop, print it out. Usually I'll print it in like a very blue color so that doesn't show up, or I can at least remove it when I scan it back in. So I'll print it out in blue, draw over it with pencil and ink, scan it back in, use that line work and paint over that. Sometimes I'll kind of go back and forth that way. And that's, again, Photoshop allows you the flexibility to move elements around and kind of work on the composition. But sometimes I just like how a pen or a brush with ink, I like that look. And there are ways to emulate that in Photoshop, but I find more and more that I spend a lot of time trying to come up with brushes or figure out how to use brushes that look like an actual paintbrush with ink on it, where I actually have a jar full of brushes and some jars of ink right here next to me that I can use and make them look like pen and ink. So sometimes it's just easier to do it that way, and I'm constantly trying to figure out exactly how I want to do that. I'm figuring it out as I go along, which is kind of the best explanation for how I do a lot of stuff. I just figure it out as I go along. People have asked me what tools I use, and that's another thing I'm kind of playing with as I go along. I've had specific questions about the white marker that I use in some of these sketches. So I'll tell you, it is a Sharpie paint pen. They make a water-based and an oil-based. I tend to favor the water-based. It just has a more even coverage, and I don't know if I just happened to get a dud when I got the oil pen. I ordered a few of them on Amazon, and I can put a note in. Let me just make a note to myself to make a note in the description here of where you can find that. I believe I got it on Amazon. It's either that or Dick Blick, where I get a lot of my other art supplies. But you can hear it. It's a little paint pen with a little shaker in it to mix it up, and you can get some good opaque white coverage with that, as long as your ink is dry. If your ink hasn't had time to dry, it can kind of muddy up a little bit, but that's generally what I'll use for the white pen. I've been exploring with all sorts of different inks and pens. When I do the marker stuff, I always use Copic markers. I just really like, they're refillable, so it's cheaper to just refill them than to keep buying new ones. I haven't been able to do that with Prismacolor. I really like how they blend. So I've got a wide range of different grays, warm and cool grays in the Copic markers. And the tricky thing with those, and this was kind of another question somebody had, is how to avoid smudging the ink of your pen with those markers. And that's something I do run into. Sometimes I'll forget how different pens interact, and I'll do a line drawing with a certain technical pen, and then go over it with marker and realize, oh crap, this is the kind that smears. And then I just try to play it off like, I meant to do that. It's just a little more, rustic and unrefined. But really, I didn't mean to do that usually. So one brand, in fact, let me see. So I'll often use microns, Pigma microns. I think those are the ones that tend to smear a little bit. Ones I've started using lately are the Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pens, and I have a couple different widths of those. But these are at least water resistant. Once they've dried, I can go over them with an ink wash and they won't smear. So I really like that. I like being able to predict what the pens are going to do. Sometimes you can get some happy accidents if they pool up weird or do weird things that you weren't expecting, and that's, you know, if you can make the most of that, then you can get some pretty unexpected effects, which can be fun. Generally, I tend to prefer to know what's going to happen. So I've got a couple scraps of paper on my drawing table next to where I'm drawing, where I'll just scribble with each pen, and, you know, I kind of plan out how I'm going to work on a piece. If I know I'm going to do an ink wash over it, I'll get that ink ready. I'll figure out what pen I'm going to use, scribble with that, wash some ink over it on this little scrap paper, just to make sure that's not going to smear. I'm trying to do that more and more. That's kind of a newer practice because I've almost ruined a few sketches. No, I wouldn't say almost. I've definitely ruined a few sketches because I didn't know how to predict how the inks were going to interact. So, you know, I could go down a list, except I don't have a list. I just kind of make it up as I go along. Yeah, so test them out before you commit to using it. If you know you're going to do an ink or marker wash afterwards, test it with the pen that you're using. And they're, you know, not all black pens are created equal. Even if they're all felt tip, they'll use different kinds of ink, and it's good to test those out first. Let's see. I think that gets through the list that I had. I apologize if I'm missing any questions that you had. I feel like I wrote them all down, but I might not have, or I might have missed something along the way. In either case, this is probably running long enough, and I don't even know if anyone's still listening at this point. So, don't want to lose anyone who might still be here. So, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I will do my best to answer them in future videos, and I kind of I'll show them, show some stuff as sorry, I'm kind of thinking as I'm talking, and I can't really do both at the same time, apparently. But yeah, I'd love to answer your questions in future videos. I am planning a series of videos right now that will show the process of sketching through screen printing. I think I've divided it up into 4 or 5 sections that should make it a little bit easier instead of sitting through a whole process. But I'm going to release those hopefully over the next few weeks. It's a piece that I'm going to be debuting at the Salt Lake Comic Con at the end of September. So if you are in the Salt Lake area or are going to that, I will be with the poster posse. I don't remember the booth name. I will advertise that as it gets closer. But that's going to be September 24th, 25th, and 26th at the Salt Lake Comic Con. I'm going to have some pieces there that I won't have on my store page. And I'm going to be doing a series of videos showing the creation of at least one of those. In fact, these that I'm painting up here, I'm hoping to have printed out for that con also. But I've worked on a screen print that I had a lot of fun with. Then I went through the whole process myself of sketching, designing it, separating the colors, and actually screen printing it. And I tried to get as much footage as I could along the way. So that'll be a video coming up hopefully soon where I can show some of that process, and that might answer some more questions or might raise some more questions. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you guys watching this, sharing this. It's really nice to have you guys interacting, and it's fun to have conversations with you guys, and you all say very kind things. Most of you. Well, I don't think anybody's ever said anything really mean. So maybe that could be a first too. If you have any questions, ask him. If you have anything really mean to say, I know you should keep it to yourself, but if it's creative, I'd love to hear it. Nothing better than a good, well thought out and well planned insult. So if you've got any of those, I'd love to hear them too. I'd like to think I have a pretty thick skin, but I'll see if you can puncture that with something really good. Of course, nice things are also welcome. Also, thanks for tuning in. I hope this has been helpful to some of you, and hopefully there will be more to come. Thanks a lot.